Thank you everybody for coming. Today we're going to be talking about Cameron Rogers and the book that he wrote, Their Days Are Like Grass. This is his first novel that he wrote, an uplifting YA LGBT romance novel. Cameron's a grad student here at Hood College in the Humanities program. He wrote a story inspired by his experiences here in Frederick and at his time at Hood College. Cameron will start us off by reading a little excerpt from his novel, and then I have some questions to ask him, and after that, we will open up to the audience to ask questions as well.
All right, awesome. Once again, thank you all so much for coming. I'm really grateful about your interest in the book and in writing it and self-publishing. So a bit of background on Their Days Are Like Grass. As mentioned before, it's a young adult romance novel with a prominent LGBT focus. The main characters are Rose, a trans woman who's in a college very similar to Hood, and Armand, an artist who is struggling to finish an exhibition before its deadline at the Delaplane Arts Center. The two end up crossing paths several times and forming an odd friendship where they start collaborating to get the exhibition completed. And over time, this blossoms into a romance between the two, where the two start to come closer and begin to open up about the troubled pasts they had and start to overcome trauma by working with each other. Armand with the loss of his parents, and Rose with estranging herself from her family out of fear of being rejected for her identity. The selection I'm reading is from page 127, a little around the halfway point of the book. By this point, Armand is questioning whether he has feelings for Rose, and their partnership is in full swing. Armand has just asked Rose to model for him for his latest painting in the series, and has given her this beautiful blue dress to complement it. She is ecstatic at the chance, knowing what this means, and also for the chance to help Armand more directly with her work. So when she gets the chance to change and she actually puts on the dress for her first time, there's this feeling of euphoria, of finally accepting herself. And that is where the selection will take off from. Her heart gave a little tremor at what she saw. The girl in the reflection was completely alien to Rose. She oozed style, class, and femininity in spite of her personal doubts about herself. She fit Rose's notions of the idealized woman, all prim and proper no matter the time of day. She was everything Rose hoped she would have become years before. A low, weak sob inadvertently left her lips. Blinking rapidly, Rose wiped away the wetness in her eyes. Tears? She needed to get a hold of herself before she came face to face with Armand. After all, proper women didn't cry in front of friends, and she felt proper enough to piss tea and crap out crumpets. Slowly, the rush of long-suppressed grief ran its course through her mind. Left in its place was pure elation. She was dressed to the nines and, for once, happy with her appearance. She was ready to make herself noticed and be the best model Armand could ask for. Surging with confidence, Rose threw open the car door and hollered for her friend.
Can we plot? I don't know what's normal here.
You can if you want, it's fine. I appreciate it regardless.
Thanks, Cameron. What made you choose that particular passage to read?
For me, it's an important turning point for both Armand and Rose's characters. Rose has, at that point, slowly been overcoming her depressive slump and finding new meaning to herself by pursuing art and helping Armand with his own art. But this represents a side of her character she hadn't formally embraced yet, where she's fully embracing the femininity that she wants to embody, and she's actually happy with herself for doing so. Now Armand's end, this is one of the moments that officially seals his feelings for her, where he realizes that it isn't just a strange fascination or anything else, it's a genuine love on his part. And the ensuing modeling that happens helps him finally cement that and come to terms with that, and then move forward with the concept of dating her and making it more than just a business partnership.
It was a big turning point for them both.
Yeah, and I also just enjoyed the positivity it brought out, the moment of joy on her end. It was really uplifting to write because you sort of empathize with characters after a while, trying to put yourselves in their mindsets, and their triumph sort of becomes your triumph in a way.
Yeah. Some other questions just about you being an author and your writing process. What got you interested in writing and becoming an author?
Well, in high school, I was at Archbishop Spalding High School in Severn. There was this beautiful library they had there, packed to the brim with young adult novels and all sorts of other books for reference and research. And I absolutely ate that up, reading as much as I could and just being fascinated with all the different worlds these authors had, all sorts of genres I hadn't tried before. And that really inspired me to look into writing on my own end. And over time, when I got in college, I started dabbling with the idea of like, okay, well, what if I actually try writing myself? What if I want to have the same sort of impact that authors like Kenneth Opel or Philip Reeve had on me? So that was the first time, around 2014, 2015 was when I really tried breaking into writing on my own. This sort of came around in 2018 and 2019, and the first book I wrote was kind of so-so in my opinion, but it was important. It was a chance to actually express myself and to see what I was capable of as an author. This felt like, Their Days Like Grass felt more like a full realization of what I wanted out of writing, and completing it left me with that same feeling of joy that I had when finishing a book by another author. So I knew I was on the right track with it.
Yeah, what was your writing process like?
Well, generally, when I have a story in mind, when inspiration strikes, it's usually when I'm in the middle of another project. It's usually when I'm writing something else or writing something in addition to another project, and there's an idea I want to pursue. So what happens from there is if I think there's any merit to it, I'll jot down what I have, just the basic essentials, like here's what I think this would be about, the basic premise, character ideas that come to mind. When I have the time to revisit it, I'll go over it again, and if I think, okay, this could work, from there I have to try to identify certain points, like who would it be marketed to, who would be the main audience, what exactly genre would it fit into, or what age range would it fit into. And from there, again, if there is viability to it, it's a matter of ironing out plot details, because the way plot events come to me is usually just several important events, the beginning and the end. And from there, it's a matter of figuring out, okay, what events lead up to this turning point? What happens here and there? Once I have a general outline of chapters done from start to finish, I try to iron out the characters more, giving them names and distinct arcs and overall storylines where they grow. Not everybody can get the same sort of treatment, but I want to at least give the characters some sense of identity. And after that's done, if I think that I can give it a shot, because there have been some false starts with stories before on my end, I'll try writing a few chapters and see how naturally it comes to me. And if I find it's working out well, then I'll keep going.
And that was all the work just to finish your story.
Yeah, that's the first draft. Like, that's only a phase of it, because after you're done just writing it, from there you need to edit it and refine it. Reach out to other people about like feedback and advice. If you can get someone else to read the book, it's insanely useful, because you get used to the material you've written as a writer. It sometimes can be very easy to miss out on points that might not make sense to someone who doesn't have the story in the back of their head, or spelling mistakes that you glance over because you're just so used to reading the material, or any other grammatical issues. Getting someone to help you out or read through it, that can do wonders. Same with, from there, looking into professional editing. It's not always easy, and there is a cost to it, but having a book that's properly formatted goes a long way for making it feel official. You want to make sure that it feels like a real novel, and it feels like any other story from the genre you're trying to adapt. It can take a lot of time. Like, finishing the draft is just the first step, but I would say that's the hardest part. It's much, much easier to edit material than it is to write new material. I would say finishing the first draft is crossing the finish line. Maybe not the finish line, crossing more than the halfway point. There's still more of the race, but you've gotten a lot done.
Yeah, more of that race is the publishing part.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Traditional publishing has a lot of advantages, but it's tough and it's very competitive. Literary agents have tricky jobs because they are getting lots, probably dozens, hundreds of emails query letters from people a day. And they're carried out mostly through online forms or through email. And because of that, you aren't always going to get feedback on what about a letter worked, what didn't, what they think of the book itself. Sometimes you do, and when you get that sort of advice, take it to heart, because that means that your agent was interested enough to at least give you some insight into what they thought worked about it. Another thing about traditional publishing is that it relieves a lot of the burden of marketing off you. You still need to market. You still need to get the word out and use whatever networking you can to spread the word about your book. But when you have a traditional publisher, you have people working with you who will get copies printed out to get to store shelves. You'll have people hosting it on digital markets and editing it. And a lot of the legwork for spreading the word about it will be taken care of. But the tough part is actually getting an agent to represent you. That's why a lot of people try to get their foot in the door through self-publishing, at least establishing themselves first, like what I did. Self-publishing gives you more freedom of control, but it also means everything is in your court. Everything from the overall design of the book, the font, the back, the front cover, that's all on you. And you certainly can look into creating the cover yourself if you think you've got the artistic talent. I've seen some people work with AI image generators for covers, but I would stay away from that. I don't really have strong feelings about that, but people do, and that can sometimes cheapen the look of your book. So I would suggest either creating the cover yourself, looking into people who can create it, or commissioning the art, like I did. The art of the book was created by a Twitter user named AnDevil88, and I met her through another fandom circle that turned out to be tremendously beneficial, because she brought Armand Rose to life in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And the artwork is one of the things that I've consistently seen complimented. I knew I made the right choice by reaching out to her. The overall cost of the commission was about $275, but it was worth it. So you'll have to pay more for this sort of art because the detailing behind it and the knowledge that this is going to carry a lot of weight. But it's worth it because people do in fact judge books by their covers, and if it has a good enough cover, they might consider it more than one that might not. I would also suggest, if you are getting into self-publishing, please look into writers groups. I'm part of the Frederick Writers Salon. They've given me a lot of good advice and a lot of insight into how the markets work, who to reach out to, what sources you can use for formatting your book or getting the word out about it. Writers want to help other writers, and if you can find any sort of support group or feedback group for writers, definitely join it. Those would be some of my strongest suggestions. Self-publishing puts the burden on you, but it also gives you a lot of control. Traditional publishing is difficult to get your foot through the door, but it's also definitely worth doing it for the sake of at least giving it a shot. It'll take some time and you might get rejected. I mean, be prepared to get rejected a lot if you do traditional publishing. I got rejected over 200 times before going into the self-publishing route, but from what I hear, the dozens or hundreds of rejections is actually kind of typical for writers these days. It's a very competitive market, and literary agents can only accept so many books that they have to sift through. They only have so much time to read each pitch. So each have their pros and cons. I would just suggest looking into traditional publishing first, but having a backup plan prepared for self-publishing. That's the approach I took, and I think it paid off in the long run for Their Days Like Grass. Oh, one more thing, very important. With self-publishing, you can have a sleeper hit on your hands. With traditional publishing, your items will take up store shelf time, and they will eventually be cycled out for something else. On one hand, this means that you'll see a lot of sales initially, but they'll eventually kind of trickle down over time as the books are cycled out for some other product. However, with self-publishing, the demand for high sales initially won't be as strong. You can gradually gain sales and accomplish a lot that way. There's less pressure on you to get a lot done. in that first week or month or so. So don't be hard on yourself when you first get self-published. I was really worried. I panicked and thought, oh, I've got to strike while the iron's hot. I'm gonna fail if I don't get this many copies sold in this time. And eventually I talked to other writers and I realized that it's like when you're self-publishing, that's not the case. You're not competing for shelf space on Amazon. They print on demand. So it isn't always easy. It's easy to pressure yourself to fall into that trap of thinking you can always do better or accomplish more. But with self-publishing, you can play the long game, and it can pay off. I mean, look at The Martian. That book was self-published. That went on to gain a traditional publisher and a movie adaptation. It just takes time. Just make sure to continue to get the word out without spamming too much, and to be patient with yourself. And to remember your family and friends and people you know. Other contacts can go a long way, even if it's just sending some moral support. A positive word or some support can do a lot of good, believe me.
Yeah, your biggest advice would be like, don't give up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, but I would say it's really easy to feel like if you've been rejected a lot in traditional publishing, or if you don't think your book has sold well enough, it's easy to feel discouraged because you're your own support network. It's not like you're working with an agent or a publisher or anything like that. So it's like you also feel like the responsibility's on you. But you have to remember that you can still turn things around, and some slow months exist. There are other times you can find more sales going on. It depends on what events are going on. If you've gotten attention from different sources, you never know. Like, there are communities like Book Talk and things like that where people on TikTok will read certain books and promote them, and you never know if your book could end up on there or if other writing circles pick it up or take interest in it. You just have to be open-minded about those sorts of possibilities and be receptive to collaborating.
And my final question is, do you have any other works coming out?
Yeah, actually, I'm in the process of finishing editing the first draft of a young adult horror novel set in Southern Maryland called Mallory Middle Paranormal Club. And that has been an off and on project since 2018, but I dove in full time to pursue it after Their Days Are Like Grass. It has been a fascinating story, researching folklore and cryptids and other aspects of Maryland, learning so much about the state that even I didn't know, and about the East Coast. Things like the Mothman and the legend of Maul Dyer and everything like that. Just all this fascinating stuff about my own state that I hadn't realized existed. And just the creativity behind some of these local legends. I wanted to capture the thrill of that, along with my own appreciation of the horror genre through art. It's been an interesting approach because it feels like with every new project I'm throwing myself into a new genre, and having two more points of view certainly made it more of a challenge, but I'm really happy with the way the first draft turned out. I'm looking forward to what feedback I get from the beta readers.
Sounds amazing. I look forward to it.
Thanks.
And with that, I wanted to kind of open it up to everybody else if anyone had any questions for Cameron.
And thanks again. Oh, yes?
At what point in your writing process do you know, or if it varies, maybe just in the case of Their Days Are Like Grass, did you know that it was going to be a novel versus a novella or novelette, or even like a short story? Like, how do you know, oh wow, this is going to be a long story or a really short one?
Well, I usually go into it with the intent of writing a novel, like something novel length. And with Their Days Like Grass, the length was a happy accident. My first book was 99,000 words at its completion, which is well over what people typically go for young adult. And editing that pushed it to 101,000 words when I really didn't need that. I would say that just write what comes to mind, what feels natural for your characters to complete. And when the manuscript is finished, during editing, take a look at it and think to yourself, okay, what's necessary for these characters to develop? What do I need to add to help them reach their intended point of growth? What do I need to do to also make the book fit within the recommended parameters of the genre? For instance, young adult romance, they typically recommend 60,000 to 79,000 words, and Their Days Like Grass clocks in at 79,000. So there was an effort to optimize it and make sure I didn't go beyond that point, because I was well aware that going above that would be fine for a young adult historical fiction novel or something else, but romance is a little shorter. With historical fiction, they're taking into account all sorts of backstory and things of that sort that you'll be cramming in about whatever you're writing. I would say the editing process is mostly when the book's proper length will come together. I was able to get that first book down to about 93,000 words, but again, I didn't realize at the time it should have been less. And there are guides online, other like writing blogs and other things that go into detail about recommended word counts for if you're doing a novella or if you're doing a novel, depending on what age you're going for, what genre you're going for. Those are really helpful, and they can give you an idea ahead of time of like, okay, here's how many words I should shoot for, or okay, I have to finish a manuscript, here's what I'll bring it down to. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm fascinated with how technology has enabled people to sort of upend traditional models. You know, with music, you've got Bandcamp where you can upload your songs, obviously all the social media. You have self-publishing now, which seems really easy, where you just send the manuscript to Amazon and they kind of handle all the printing based on the demand. I guess my question is, do you set the price and how much do they take?
Yes, when it comes to Amazon, you set the price for print copies and digital copies. Same also goes for Google Play and Kobo, where the book can also be found. The main thing is Amazon also sets the bare minimum amount, which is the amount that would cover the costs of hosting it on their servers or printing it out, because every book is made to order. What this means, on one hand, that it's not taking up shelf space, and if you have, say, a request from a bookstore to have a certain amount of copies, you can have them printed. But it also means that there's no physical inventory unless you own it. The cost, you set it yourself. It varies. I've seen people recommend different things for different genres. Usually the recommendation is the print copy should be about 3 times the cost of the digital copy. Because the digital copy, there are fewer fees that Amazon will be taking, because it's really just a smaller digital purchase. Like the digital copy of Their Days Like Grass is about $4, while the print copy is about $12. Because Amazon has to do more. They have to print out the book, they have to use ink to create the cover, they have to ship it to you for a certain amount of times. So they have to make sure they still get something out of the deal. In the end, you're still able to get a decent amount of royalties out of each purchase. You'll see more of a profit off of print copies being sold. And sometimes bookstores will also be interested in buying copies, especially if you're local. If you get into writing, make sure to check local places before anything else. They really like to represent, and they are usually happy to take your stuff on their shelves. But there are usually forms and different methods online that you use to do that. So I'd recommend looking into their websites. Like, you can find copies of this at the Delaplane Arts Center, very fittingly, and at the Curious Iguana bookstore, both in downtown Frederick. And I got in contact with them via email and talked things out from there. They did an upfront purchase for it. So the Curious Iguana and other bookstores, they can set the price from there. But when it comes to the storefront option, you set a price. You determine, like, if you think that $12 is too much, if you don't think you'll get as many copies sold, then you could put it down to 11 or 10. Or if you think that $4.99 is not enough, you can set it up to $5 for a digital copy. It just depends on what all is in the book, in addition to how much you think it would be worth, how much you think people would be willing to pay for it. I can understand charging more for a comic, for instance, because of the sheer work behind putting so many illustrations into a book. I hope that answered your question.
Very much, yeah.
Yes.
What made you write this as a YA book instead of like just a traditional like adult fiction novel?
Well, I thought about going the traditional adult route. I think because a lot of the stuff I read in high school was YA, and there was a certain fascination to it. I liked the boundaries it sets. Sort of like when you have free reign over everything, you can really let your imagination go wild, but it's nice to have some settings in place, especially if you're a new author. So you know it's like, okay, my book cannot be longer than this. Only some content would be okay, and this, like something like this or that would work. Sometimes it helps to put limits on what you're going to write about. And I found that young adult, the age range of the young adult, not quite genre, but recommendation, was a good balance for me. Because there wasn't really anything in Their Days Like Grass that was steamy enough to warrant a new adult or an adult rating. The most there is are a few kisses throughout the novel. But on the other hand, I feel like there was still some maturity behind young adult stuff. You'd be surprised at what all young adult books can cover these days. So there's still plenty of freedom to work with, but I found that the young adult setting was the perfect compromise for me, especially because Armand and Rose would still count as young adults within the age range. They're the higher end of it, being 18 and 19, but I thought that it still ended up working well and fitting the content of the book, given that despite sometimes having heavier subject matters covered, it's still a lighthearted and upbeat sort of book. So it was always envisioned as a young adult sort of thing. I'd consider it adult, but I think that young adult was the best choice for it. Thank you for asking. Anyone else? Oh, yes?
When you were naming your characters, how did you go about that? And did you find yourself going back and forth a lot? You're just like, oh no, this is, and then you're just like, okay, yes, this person's definitely, and then you never change their name.
Yeah, some characters underwent name changes. Names can be tricky. Sometimes there's a temptation to give every character, to give them a symbolic name, to have some meaning behind what you call them. And I think that is important for certain books. It just depends on who you're writing and what purpose it would serve. And also making sure that things sound typical. I don't know, I have sometimes strange naming habits for characters, so some of them underwent changes. Rose was always Rose, Armand was always Armand. Their last names had some changes. I remember some streets in Key West were used as inspirations for the characters' last names. Others came about more through different inspirations, like the character of Esther, who throughout the book has this game project she's working on. Her name came from the game Dear Esther, which is this story-driven game about a man trying to find his wife after losing memories of her. And other characters, such as Joseph, were more straightforward. I just wanted a typical name for Armand's older brother to just set him apart from Armand's eccentricities and some other aspects of his character. I typically don't get too attached to certain names unless there's sometimes a name that comes along and I'm like, yes, I want that for my character. Some of them, again, the main characters came almost immediately. It was a secondary cast that had some name shifts and other last minute changes. In the end, I was happy with what I chose, but there is definitely room for switching them around, especially if you're writing and you find that writing out their name in dialogue, it just doesn't fit them as well as you'd think. And that's a good question, though. I know that the current book I'm working on, Mallory Middle Paranormal Club, that had a ton of name changes right down to the title, which got changed a ton. Their Days Like Grass was chosen almost immediately for the title, based on a Bible verse that's referenced in here, also as the name of Armand's exhibition, and from a song by this indie band, Small Leaks Sink Ships, which I'm a big fan of.
Cool.
Thank you.
Were you tempted to write something that would go viral as opposed to more of a feel-good story to try to, garner more interest in some more books?
I would say sort of. With my first book, a common thing I noticed was that some agents liked it, but it was also just kind of tougher for them to get into. It was strange having it set in Eastern Europe. The names were a lot tougher to work with, and overall, it didn't quite have the diversity that some agents want. Agents like that, but it's not a deal breaker for them. I went into Their Days Like Grass knowing that, okay, I'm going to write what I know, and I'm going to write this uplifting young adult LGBT novel, because during research, one of the things that surprised me was that there are a lot of well-written books out there about LGBTQ plus people, but a lot of them can be pretty bleak, and they can often end miserably. Nothing against the writers for writing that. I mean, they're the ones who trailblazed in order to make something like this happen. But I guess it was just sort of a surprising trend. And I wanted to write something a little different, something a little more hopeful as a result. It's tempting to focus on just pandering and to think, okay, I'm gonna write this with the intent to get as much attention on it as possible. I debated including whether to mention Rose was trans in the back part of it, because I didn't want it to seem like it was just me using that as a selling point. Another friend of mine ultimately talked me into it, mostly for the sake of making sure the narrative was up front, but also to make sure that it wasn't a dishonest thing. To sell the book as it is. It's not really a twist within the book that Rose is transgender. It's more just something that is never explicitly noted until about the halfway point. But there are a lot of clear-cut indications that that's the case until she directly confirms it. The temptation to make something that's just going to be deliberately viral and will spark attention is, again, tempting, because some people believe that there's no such thing as bad publicity and people will hate buy and hate read what you do. But I've found that strategy only kind of works. People might fall for that once, but after you do that, you lose credibility with people, and they decide, well, I'm just not gonna get what you're selling then if you're gonna write like that. I've seen it happen to other artists and writers as well, and I just wanted to be upfront and just write with the intent to put out what I had, even if it meant that it wouldn't generate as much buzz or get as much controversy or anything like that. And in the end, I'm pretty happy with the choice. It was there was a lot of hemming and hawing on my end about what would be a controversial choice, what I should put in, what I should leave out, some revisions about making sure that I got everything as accurately as I could. But the end goal was to have an honest, upfront, and heartfelt sort of romance story, especially one set in Frederick and with an artistic sort of vibe to it.
When you were writing, as part of your beta reads, did you ever have trans people as a sensitivity reader or anything?
Mm-hmm. Actually, yeah, a friend of mine, Jess, I'd interviewed her prior to that, and she had helped with beta reading for the aspects of the transgender characterization of Rose. Also reaching out to other members of the LGBT community for the sake of understanding better, not just how to write her arc, but also how to make sure I portray everyone else accurately, because there are characters like Beryl, who's a lesbian, and I wanted to be sure that any depictions of sexualities were done as accurately and as faithfully as possible, because I was going into this only knowing so much, and I had to realize that okay, I do not have experience with this, but I want to be sure that I compensate for that and that I give this the fairest shake I can. So reaching out to people, doing research on my end, that did a lot of good. I'm really grateful I did, and the friends and other people who I spoke to about that contributed a ton. In the end, it really helped me shape Rose's character in a satisfying way. And I think that part of what helped me get so much depth was speaking to people who had gone through that sort of experience, or other people from the community, because they could tell accounts of their own friends going through this. I appreciate you asking.
That's a great question.
Honesty is an important part of this, and making sure that I did her characterization justice was a very important part of writing Rose.
I was wondering if you wanted to speak to how it is to depict a town you're familiar with, and then sending out one thing more specific that I thought of was like, man, was it weird to reach out to your fandom friend who probably lives in another state, and then they just put the tower from the park on the cover, like in their drawing? Like how does that feel as somebody who's familiar with Frederick?
Well, it was strange. Setting in Frederick felt like a good follow-up to the first story I'd written, because that was something I was very unfamiliar with, even though I did a lot of research into historical accuracy and so on. It felt good to take things simple and write what I knew. And I had known Frederick pretty well. Doing research helped from there about understanding it better and aspects of the community, especially the artistic side of it. I think that that's what helped me become so passionate about writing the book, truthfully, was setting in Frederick and being able to incorporate aspects of that. One thing that I should mention, since my parents are in attendance, that I had been hesitant initially to name specific names of places and things, but they were like, Cameron, you want to do that. You want people to know, hey, this is in Frederick, this place, this restaurant, Brewer's Alley is real, and you can go there. I don't know why I was thought, oh no, I shouldn't at the time. I think because I was new to everything, and this was unfamiliar territory, writing contemporary romance, but it helped build the authenticity of Frederick, and especially with stuff like the Delaplane taking front and center attention. As for reaching out to the cover artist, that part was interesting, because after proposing the idea to her and setting the terms for it, making sure that like she understood this is going to be for a novel, it's going to be the cover art, it's going to be front and center, I'm going to credit you within the first pages of the book. From there, it's a matter of just paying the initial fee up front to show that it's like, I'm good for this, and if you work on it, it's like the rest is coming. But there were only so many images of Baker Park that were online, so I went ahead and did some helping on that end. One day in the spring of 2023, I went out to Baker Park and just went around the tower taking photos of it, getting references of the area, trying to make sure I covered all angles of it so it could be properly represented on the cover art. As for the depictions of Armand and Rose, it's similar to the style she uses for fan art of shows like The Owl House, just some differences naturally to set it apart. She sent me some initial character sketches and like concept poses, and that's where we ironed things out from there. I was really happy with the initial choices. It was just a matter of settling on how they should be posed, the way they should look and be angled. The sort of wind added to it was a nice detail from her that I thought added a lot of charm to it. In the end, it was a matter of just making sure she was interested and also making sure she knew that I was good for it, that I wasn't just going to be like, oh, this is for like, you'll be paid in like, what's the term for it?
Exposure.
You paid in exposure, yes. Artists hate that. Never suggest to do a cover and be paid in exposure, because sure, you will get more eyes on their art, but artists need to eat too. And if they're gonna take on a project this big, they'd rather do it for money, which I totally get, and I think it was a perfectly reasonable trade to make. It was a fascinating collaboration, and I'm still in touch with her about that. She's been really supportive of the events and of other promotions for the book, which I'm really grateful for, because like I said, she really helped bring Armand and Rose to life. And I think her cover really helped me cement the authenticity of the book, at least in my eyes.
Could you talk about the research that you did into the art world and the art community and how you learned about all of that?
Oh yes, I love that aspect of it as well. The second aspect of research that I was into the world of art, because I only knew so much getting into it. Other than that, I wanted to write a book. centered around an artist character and about an exhibition. Researching it was a matter of visiting different art galleries, looking into different painting styles, and my favorite part was actually reaching out to local artists from Southern Maryland and Frederick about their own experiences, what it's like to paint, what the process is behind it, art, like preparing for art exhibitions, what an assistant does, all those important questions. I got help from local artists like Harry Richardson and David Zippy from St. Mary's County. They had so much insight that I was immensely grateful for. And learning about different aspects of art, like scratch boarding, which Armand mentions around a third of the way through the book, that was fascinating in itself, just seeing how many ways you can get ideas across through art. Like, it gave me a greater appreciation for different artistic styles. Armand's style is more of a traditional one, though I definitely went for more of a surrealist vibe to his paintings. They're heavily based on the works of Nicholas Ackerblad, who's a Swedish musician and painter who's made absolutely gorgeous stuff that I based some of his designs off of, at least in description. He made some art for the Hotline Miami games and some other games as well. And that's how I found out about him. And learning about these art styles and about the process behind painting, where they get inspiration from, that honestly encouraged me to write even more about it, because not only would I learn about what specifically I was researching, but there would be side details I would learn that I could use to expand upon the book and expand upon the characters and the way they developed. It would help me flesh Armand out further and to give him the full arc he really needed. In the end, it came together nicely. I think that research turned out to be one of the best parts of it. So does anyone else have any questions?
See, I know I can text you later if I have any more questions that I think of later. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I got a new phone, so I'm gonna need to ask for your number again after this, because I
It's
lost
fine.
it in the...
I'm just so grateful that you guys came. It means a lot that anybody showed up, honestly, considering this is the first thing I've ever self-published and it's sort of a niche topic. I wasn't sure if anyone would be interested, so it means the world that you guys showed up and were interested in the book and writing and self-publishing. I hope that the advice I gave was helpful. I hope it gave some insight into writing and publishing and the different avenues for it. I hope it inspires you guys to write the same way I've been inspired to write. And I just hope you guys enjoyed this event. It means the world to me that anybody showed up. So thank you again. I'm very grateful. And with that in mind, I will be selling and signing copies or signing existing copies if anybody has them. And there are still refreshments back there, so feel free to hit them up. And I'll be up front here if you guys have any questions that else you want to ask. Thanks again for coming, everybody. This was fantastic. And thank you also, Andrew. The questions and the discussion you led, you did a brilliant job, and I'm so glad I reached out to you about it.